Hey everyone, and welcome back to Scary Tales. Before we dive into today's bizarre and truly mind-bending tale, I do just want to take a moment to thank everyone. Seriously, this channel wouldn't be growing like it is if it wasn't without your support. You know, your guys' stories, your feedback, and I value literally every single thought and suggestion. And I'd love to hear what you guys think about today's mystery, so as you're watching, feel free to drop your theories or share any of your own strange experiences down in the comments section. Let's keep this community thriving because you're all an extremely important part of it. And as always, of course, if today's story creeps you out, make sure that you drown that like button in a puddle of mysterious and slimy goo, and then watch it sink into the depths of YouTube's algorithm. Seriously, don't let it escape. It already knows way too much. Now, on to today's tale. The date was August 7th, 1994, and the place was Oakville, Washington. A town so small and quiet that many people didn't even know it existed before this date. Nestled within the lush forests and gray skies of the Pacific Northwest, Oakville had a population of fewer than 700 people. It was a town where everyone knew everyone. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, and where the daily routine of life was never really interrupted by anything out of the ordinary. That is, until something happened that no one could explain. Now, that summer had been like any other. Long, warm days with occasional bursts of rain that reminded everyone they were still in Washington. But on August 7th, something different happened. Now, it started as a typical summer rainstorm. These dark clouds rolled in, and people went about their days as they usually would when the skies darkened, being accustomed to that in Washington state. But this wasn't any ordinary rainstorm. When the rain finally started to fall, the townspeople noticed something peculiar. What they were experiencing wasn't actually rain at all. See, what happened is these small translucent blobs began to fall from the sky, and they looked like clear jelly just falling from the heavens. It's covering everything in sight. These blobs were about the size of rice grains, but they quickly coated cars, rooftops, streets, and gardens. I mean, you name it. Everything was just covered in these things. And at first, people didn't really know what to make of it. Some thought it was just some sort of like weird weather phenomenon. Maybe like hail or sleet mixed with dirt or mud. But as they stepped outside to get a closer look, they quickly realized that this was something else entirely. Now, imagine this, alright. Imagine you just walk out onto your front porch and you see these tiny, squishy blobs covering literally everything around you, and they're clinging to everything they touch. It doesn't matter what it is. Plants, windows, sidewalks, and people. And as they reached down to touch them, they discovered that they were like cold, slimy, squishy, had the consistency of like jello, is what a lot of people described them as feeling like. And one of the first people to notice something was a local named Dorothy Hearn. Now, Dorothy lived on the outskirts of Oakville with her family, tending to her garden like she always did when the weather allowed it. And on that particular day, something strange caught her attention. It was these blobs that were dropping down. As she looks around, they're on her arms, they're getting in her gardening gloves, down her shirt, and it's just covering her entire body. So she bent down to pick one of them up, and when she did, she's like, feels it, and she remembers them being cool and slippery. Like, she couldn't really grab them. She would try to, but they would just kind of slip through her fingers. And then she's trying to figure out what they could be, but, nothing came to mind. It was like nothing she'd ever seen before. But that wasn't all. So, within hours of handling these things, all these little rice grain pieces of gelatinous goo, Dorothy began to feel unwell. And she started as a simple dizzy spell, and it escalated into full-blown nausea, shortness of breath, and overwhelming fatigue. And before she knew it, she'd collapsed in her garden. So her family, they get her and they rush her to the hospital, and they're fearing the worst. And when Dorothy gets there, she looks around and she realizes she's not the only one affected. More and more residents of Oakville started to report these same symptoms: dizziness, nausea, respiratory problems, and even flu-like symptoms. Now the local hospital was flooded with patients, all incoming with the same complaints of this illness. Some were so sick that they'd been hospitalized for days, and others seemed to recover more quickly. But these symptoms weren't limited to just the residents. Pets and livestock around the town also began to fall ill, and animals that had come into contact with the blobs were found dead, including frogs, ravens, yes, ravens, cats, dogs, you name it. Pretty much anything that this had contact with was affected in some way. And it was clear that whatever had fallen from the sky wasn't harmless. With no explanation in sight, the townspeople just began to do what townspeople do. They began to speculate, come up with their own theories, their own ideas. Some people thought that the blobs might be some kind of pollution or something, maybe from a nearby industrial plant. Though Oakville wasn't really known for being close to any major factories, people thought, well, maybe it got here from the town over or something. Others thought that it might be some sort of chemical runoff or some type of waste that's made its way into the clouds and rained down on the town. But what happened is, as more people fell ill, the town's anxiety just got worse and worse, and what once seemed like an odd weather event was now being viewed as something potentially even sinister. And this is when the first rumors about military involvement started getting spread. See, there's a theory going around the town that, several residents reported seeing military planes, first of all. They were flying overhead the days leading up to this event. Got old men sitting on their porch looking at all these different military planes, as men do. And some speculate that the blobs were part of a biological warfare experiment that these planes had released days prior. Something the government was testing without the public's knowledge. And after all, it wasn't unheard of for that type of thing to happen, for the military to conduct secret tests in remote areas. And Oakville, with its extremely small population and secluded location, seemed like the perfect place for such an operation. Now, these rumors of military involvement were just further fueled when a group of these mysterious, you guessed it, men in black, arrived in Oakville shortly after the blobs fell, and they were seen collecting samples of this gelatinous substance, but they refused to answer any questions or even explain who they were. They showed up, they worked quickly, they gathered the samples, and they left town just as quickly and just as mysteriously as they'd arrived. So, these substances didn't just vanish without a trace. Samples of the blobs were taken to local laboratories for testing, and the initial findings were something so bizarre that it was just as bizarre as the event itself. So hospital technicians reportedly found human white blood cells inside the blobs. This revelation only deepened the mystery. Why are white human blood cells falling from the sky? What kind of experiment could have even caused this? The town was left with more questions, more speculation, and the rumors just started to run rampant at this point. But the plot thickened when the Washington State Department of Health conducted their own tests. Because according to them, well, at least in their initial report, the blobs didn't contain human blood cells. Instead, they said that they found two species of bacteria inside the substance. One was known as Pseudomonas fluorescens and Enterobacter cloacae, both of which are naturally occurring in the environment, although no one else has reported this phenomena happening anywhere else. But the discovery of both these elements was significant, but it didn't really explain why people were falling ill because of it. And while these bacteria can be found in nature and are generally harmless, Enterobacter cloacae has been known to cause infections, particularly in individuals with already compromised immune systems. However, this still didn't account for the widespread illness that affected both humans and animals. So you have these conflicting reports. The initial one suggests the presence of these human white blood cells. And then it gets sent off to the government and they say, no, it's actually bacteria. So that just kind of adds more fuel to the fire as well, just with all the phenomena surrounding the town. Could these samples have been tampered with? Or the popular belief was the government just covering it up. And in the days and the weeks following the event, somehow the lab samples that the hospital had apparently mysteriously disappeared, making further testing impossible. So again, this just thickens the plot of a government cover-up here. Now, as the story of the Oakville Blobs spread, the town started becoming the focus of national attention. News outlets picked up the story, and soon reporters and curious independent investigators descended upon Oakville, eager to get to the bottom of the mystery. But the more attention the story received, the more rumors and speculation flourished around it. And one of the most popular theories was that the blobs were, a part of this military experiment, a test for biological chemical agents that have apparently gone wrong. It was obviously the presence of the planes in the area, the disappearance and the appearance and disappearance of these government agents collecting these samples, and then the disappearance of that, crucial evidence, all seemed to point in this direction. And it wasn't the first time that the government had been accused of conducting secret experiments on its own citizens. Throughout the 20th century, there's been numerous instances where the government had tested biological agents on unsuspecting populations. And the most infamous of these was Project MK Ultra. And if you guys haven't gone over that, we will in the future. But this was a covert program that involved the testing of drugs, including LSD, on American citizens without their knowledge or their consent. And if that's something you guys would like to hear about, let me know in the comments below. So, could Oakville been the site of another experiment like that? And now it seemed plausible, especially given the remote location and the small population. And if the government was testing a biological agent, they likely chose Oakville because its isolation would minimize exposure to the general public. And there is another theory that circulates out there, and this is actually an extremely popular theory. It started to gain traction shortly after government denial, and that's the idea that these blobs were the remains of jellyfish. And now, according to this theory, the military had been conducting bombing exercises over the Pacific, and during one of those exercises, they believe a school of jellyfish had been inadvertently blown into the atmosphere. The debris from the jellyfish, carried by the wind, had then rained down over Oakville. And now, this theory might seem far-fetched, but it did have a certain level of plausibility. One, jellyfish are gelatinous creatures. They had similar texture to the blobs. And additionally, there's been historical references and instances where sea creatures, even fish and frogs, were swept up into the atmosphere during storms, only to rain down on towns and cities miles inland. This actually happened to me when I was a kid with minnows and fish eggs. So supporters of the jellyfish theory pointed to the military bombing exercises taking place off the coast of Washington around the same time as the Oakville event. And they believed that the explosions had caused fragments of jellyfish to be lifted into the air, where they were then carried by weather patterns and deposited over Oakville during these rainstorms that had taken place over the next few days. However, while the theory is popular among some residents, it lacked any hard evidence, and there were no tests done to ever confirm whether the blobs contained any organic material consistent with jellyfish. And honestly, most scientists to this day remain skeptical of this theory. I think probably the strangest part of this entire mystery wasn't just that the blobs fell once, it was that they fell multiple times, which is what differentiates these between the other strange occurrences falling from the sky. So between August 7th and September 27th, 1994, there were 6 separate instances of the blobs falling over Oakville, and each time the same strange scene played out. Residents would step outside to find their streets, cars, and rooftops covered in this slimy substance. In some cases, the blobs would fall during a rainstorm, kind of blending it with the water and making it difficult to tell where the rain ended and the blobs began. But in other cases, it seemed like the blobs just kind of fell out of a clear blue sky with no rain, no clouds, nothing, just kind of adding to the confusion and the eerie nature of this phenomena overall. Now, these multiple occurrences made it difficult to dismiss the blobs as a one-time event or a fluke of nature. And I think this is what has fascinated people for so long. Something, whether natural or man-made, was happening repeatedly. And the residents of Oakville were caught in the middle of it. Now, going back to what we said a little bit earlier about the disappearance of the samples, obviously one of the most disturbing aspects of the case is, the event of the disappearance of those lab samples, so there couldn't be any further testing. After they revealed the presence of either bacteria or human white blood cells, there was a plan to try to identify the exact nature of the substance, but before the test could be conducted, these samples apparently had vanished from where they were being stored, and obviously raising some serious questions. People are asking things like, how does this disappear? You don't just lose these things. Have they been stolen? Have they been destroyed? Or deliberately removed? And if so, who was responsible, right? The disappearance of these samples fed into the growing belief that the government was hiding something. Perhaps the true nature of the blobs were a result of that experiment, and they were trying to keep it from the public. But without the samples, obviously no further analysis was possible. There was an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that actually covers this a little bit in detail, including the disappearance of these specimen. I believe that Robert Stack recounted the events of this, and he actually interviewed some of the locals who'd experienced it firsthand. So that's some amazing content. The episode introduced literally the entire world, really, to this phenomena, and that's kind of what ignited the public fascination with the case in the first place. And for many, it seemed like something out of a science fiction novel. You got this gelatinous rain, these mysterious illnesses, disappearing evidence, like all just the perfect recipe for this government cover-up conspiracy theory. And, with the lack of any definitive answers, it kind of just left people speculating for a long time. And despite the attention, there's not been any new leads or explanations. And the case kind of just remains as mysterious as ever, with Oakville's residents left to kind of speculate what they'd experienced, what had happened in that town. Now, there are obviously some more questions and some more theories, but even after decades, the blobs remain one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in modern history. There's not been, like I said, any new evidence, any new theories, anything to really explain what it is. So how are we supposed to know? How do we get to the bottom of this? I tried doing some research myself and seeing if there was anything. I spent a long time digging into the internet on this case. I probably spent, I would say, close to 30 hours researching this stuff, and I cannot find any logical answer to what these could be. The jellyfish theory does, in a way, sound plausible to me, but the fact that when they were tested, the initial report said white human blood cells, and then after that, the follow-up tests said that, it was bacteria. Nothing in any of these reports ever says anything at all about the potential of it being biological material from jellyfish. So, in the years since the blobs fell over Oakville, the town kind of returned to its quiet, unassuming existence. And the story of the blobs is still told by the residents, passed down as a local legend. But for most people, it's become just another strange footnote in the history of the life that they lived. And for those that did experience the blobs, the vivid memories remain. The fear, am I going to die? Is this something that's going to pass down genetically? They're confused, the sense of helplessness. It's something that they carry with them to this day. And while the rest of the world may have moved on, the people of Oakville still wonder what really happened during those weeks in 1994. So now, I want to hear from you. What do you think about the Oakville Blobs? Do you have any theories about what really happened? Maybe you've experienced something strange or unexplainable yourself, and I'd love to hear your stories, your thoughts, and your feedback in the comments. Because honestly, after all, this community is built on the eerie, the strange, and downright bizarre. And every single one of you is a valued part of it. I take everything that you guys have to say very seriously, and I'm grateful. And hey, if today's story was of interest to you, be sure to let me know in the comments section. Or maybe you think the story's complete baloney. But whatever the case, your feedback is extremely important, and it helps me to improve this channel for all of you. So until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are all too real.